They gave me the property nobody wanted. 3 years later, when my mother finally saw what I had turned it into, she gave me 72 hours to hand control of it to my brother. The morning she said it, she was standing beneath the stone arch at the entrance to Cedar Hollow Estate, wearing a cream coat and pearl earrings I remembered from childhood. It was 7:50 on a cold October morning in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Mist hung over the vineyard rows. The flagstones were still wet from overnight rain, and beyond the guest cottages, a groundskeeper was trimming rosemary along the path. I had 2 wedding tours booked before lunch, a photography workshop arriving that afternoon, and a technology company from Charlotte checking in Friday for a 4-day retreat. It was a normal working morning. Then my mother looked past me at the restored manor, the glass-walled pavilion, the gardens, and the cars already parked near reception. "Your father thinks this should be Nathan's now," she said. For a second, I thought I had misunderstood her. "This?" I asked. "All of it. 3 years of permits, loans, sleepless nights, contractor disputes, frozen pipes, ruined shoes, and every dollar I had saved," and she spoke about it as though she were moving a lamp from one room to another. I almost smiled. "You hated this place," I said. "That isn't the point, Emma. Don't make this difficult." That sentence clarified something for me. Some people can ignore an empty field for years, then suddenly discover its importance after someone else builds a house on it. To understand how we got there, I have to go back 3 years. My father, Thomas Carter, has always considered himself a practical man. He is not openly cruel, he does not shout or slam doors, he simply makes decisions for other people and calls the result common sense. He has 2 children. My older brother, Nathan, was 35 then, polished, confident, successful in commercial real estate, and gifted with the kind of charm that makes people assume competence before he has demonstrated any. I was 32, quieter and considerably less impressive at family dinners. I was a landscape architect at a regional design firm in Richmond. I spent my days thinking about drainage, retaining walls, native planting, and how people move through outdoor spaces. Nathan spent his days meeting investors in restaurants where the menus did not list prices. When our grandmother Evelyn died, she left my father several properties, including an aging mountain estate outside Charlottesville that had once been a small vineyard and inn. 16 acres, a neglected main house, 2 cottages, an equipment barn, and vines that had not been properly tended in years.
Nathan received a renovated 2-bedroom condominium in Georgetown, Washington, D.C. It had tall windows, original hardwood floors, underground parking, and a rooftop terrace overlooking the Potomac if you stood near the western edge. At the time, it was worth a little over $1.3 million. I received Cedar Hollow. On paper, the land made the numbers look reasonable. In reality, the place was barely standing. The main house had water damage in 3 rooms. 1 chimney was cracked. Half the upstairs windows had swollen shut, and the heating system seemed to belong in a museum. The rear veranda had pulled away from the foundation by almost 4 inches. The 2 guest cottages were worse. One had mold climbing the bathroom walls. The other had become storage for rusted vineyard equipment, broken furniture, and boxes nobody had opened since the late 1990s. The barn roof had partially collapsed during a storm 2 winters earlier. The vineyard irrigation lines were clogged or broken. Blackberry vines had swallowed entire rows of grapes. A retaining wall along the western slope was beginning to fail. My mother called the property full of potential. Nathan looked at the photographs on my father's tablet and laughed. "Honestly, Emma, this suits you better anyway." He meant I liked projects. Or maybe he meant I was the kind of person who could be handed something broken without anyone feeling guilty about it. My father explained that while Nathan's apartment had a higher immediate value, Cedar Hollow included 16 acres. So long term, he said, it balances out. He had probably calculated it carefully. That was the problem. Numbers can prove 2 things are equal without proving they are fair. I thanked him. Nathan looked surprised. What nobody at that table knew was that I had already noticed something in the estate photographs. The southern slope received nearly perfect afternoon light. The house sat only 90 minutes from Richmond, and the surrounding region had become increasingly popular for weddings, retreats, and weekend tourism. I didn't see a ruined estate. I saw infrastructure waiting to be rebuilt. The following Saturday, I drove out alone. I brought a laser measure, moisture meter, inspection camera, notebook, work gloves, and enough coffee for several regrettable decisions. I spent almost 9 hours walking the property. By sunset, I had 23 pages of notes. Roof replacement, electrical overhaul, foundation stabilization, drainage redesign, plumbing, septic inspection, structural repairs to both cottages, barn reconstruction, vineyard clearing, parking access, commercial kitchen requirements, fire code upgrades if I ever wanted guests. I sat on the broken veranda steps after dark and added the rough numbers together. The result was painful. A responsible restoration would cost somewhere between $210,000 and $280,000. I had $37,000 saved. For about 10 minutes, I considered selling. The land alone would have brought enough money for a down payment on a comfortable apartment in Richmond. I could have gone back to work Monday, continued my career, and told myself I had made the sensible decision. Then I looked across the property. The mountains were almost black against the evening sky. One surviving row of vines caught the last orange light. The barn was a silhouette with half its roof missing. And for reasons I still can't entirely explain, I knew that selling it would bother me for the rest of my life. On Monday, I showed my plans to my supervisor, Daniel Mercer. He stared at the drawings for several minutes. "You realize this is insane," he said. "Yes." He smiled. "Good. Then at least you understand the project." The firm allowed me to use its design software and supplier contacts outside working hours. Daniel also introduced me to 2 contractors he trusted. That solved almost none of my financial problem. So I wrote a business plan. Not a renovation plan, a business plan. Cedar Hollow would become a small destination estate. Guest accommodations, private events, workshops, vineyard dinners, and corporate retreats. And once I put that idea on paper, the ruined property stopped looking like an inheritance. It started looking like a company.
The financing was the first real test. I applied for a small business development loan through Blue Ridge Community Bank. My loan officer was a woman named Patricia Monroe, who had spent 24 years financing farms, inns, and rural businesses across central Virginia. She read my business plan twice. Then she studied the architectural drawings spread across her desk. "You're planning to live there during construction?" she asked. "Yes. And manage most of the renovation yourself?" "Design and project management. I'll hire licensed contractors for electrical, plumbing, structural work, and anything else that requires certification." She leaned back. "And you still have a full-time job?" "For now." Patricia looked at me for several seconds. Then she closed the folder. "I've approved people with worse plans and much more confidence," she said. "You seem to have the opposite problem." 2 weeks later, the bank approved $155,000. That was the moment Cedar Hollow stopped being an interesting idea and became something capable of ruining me financially. The first year was not beautiful. There were no dramatic before and after photographs because almost every stage simply looked worse than the stage before it. We removed damaged plaster and discovered rotten framing. We opened the kitchen wall and found electrical wiring that looked as though 3 generations of homeowners had repaired it using whatever was available in the garage. The septic inspection failed. The first contractor I hired for drainage disappeared halfway through the job after receiving a deposit. A January freeze burst a temporary water line and flooded part of the ground floor. For 13 months, I slept in the least damaged guest cottage on a mattress placed directly on plywood flooring. I cooked with a single electric burner. I showered at a gym 20 minutes away whenever the plumbing stopped working. I learned exactly how many hardware stores remained open after 8 p.m. I also learned that renovation has very little to do with inspiration. Most of it is moving things. Timber, stone, trash, tools, buckets of debris, boxes of tile, lengths of pipe. Then moving everything again because somebody needs access to the wall behind it. My friends visited during the first summer. They stood in the courtyard, surrounded by scaffolding and pallets. "This is going to be incredible," one of them said. She used the same voice people use when encouraging someone halfway through a marathon they would never personally run. Nathan never visited. My parents came once. My mother stepped carefully through the unfinished entrance hall, avoiding dust with exaggerated precision. "Well," she said, looking around, "at least you're keeping busy." My father inspected the exposed beams. "You're putting a lot into this." "I know. Just make sure you know when to stop." They stayed 52 minutes. They brought sandwiches. They did not offer money. They did not offer help. And strangely, that became one of the best things they could have done for me, because nobody in my family believed Cedar Hollow mattered. Nobody called asking for updates. Nobody questioned my decisions. Nobody demanded a role. I had something more valuable than encouragement. I had privacy. By month 16, the main structural work was finished. The house had a new slate roof, reinforced foundations, modern plumbing, new electrical panels, and geothermal heating.
The veranda had been rebuilt using salvaged stone from an old retaining wall. The 2 cottages became 4 private guest suites. I designed the interiors around what the property already was, rather than trying to make it fashionable. Lime plaster walls, wide oak floors, local stone fireplaces, large windows facing the mountains, simple furniture made by regional craftsmen. The old dining room became a reception lounge. The kitchen became large enough for both guests and professional catering. But the barn changed everything. Originally, I planned to demolish it. The damage was extensive, and rebuilding it made very little financial sense. Then one evening in May, I stood inside the remaining timber frame while sunlight came through the missing roof. The mountains were visible through the western wall, and suddenly I could see exactly what the room could become. Not another building, the centerpiece. I changed the plans the next morning. The rebuilt barn became an event pavilion. We kept every original beam that could be saved and reinforced the structure with black steel. The western wall was replaced with glass, so the mountains became part of the room. A narrow skylight ran the length of the roof, and the old stone foundation remained exposed along the interior. It could seat 140 guests. Behind it, we added a professional prep kitchen, storage rooms, accessible restrooms, and a separate service entrance so catering crews could work without crossing through an event. The permit was approved in month 24. That approval changed the economics of Cedar Hollow completely. Weddings could pay for improvements that overnight stays alone never would. The vineyard came next. I hired an agricultural consultant named Samuel Price, a 61-year-old man who had worked with Virginia vineyards since before local wine tourism became fashionable. He walked every row slowly, cutting vines, checking roots, examining soil. At the end of the second day, he found me near the equipment shed. "You've got more alive here than I expected," he said. "How much more?" "Maybe 70%. I had expected him to recommend clearing everything. Instead, we saved 11 rows of Cabernet Franc, 8 of Viognier, and a small section of old Petit Verdot vines my grandmother had planted decades earlier. We installed new irrigation, repaired drainage channels, replaced dead vines, and planted native flowers between the vineyard and the courtyard. The equipment shed became a small glass studio overlooking the southern slope. 3 walls were windows. The original stone wall remained behind a wood-burning stove. I imagined yoga classes there, photography workshops, private dinners, small creative retreats. Eventually, all of those happened. I named the business Cedar Hollow Estate because my grandmother had always called the valley behind the house the Hollow, and several enormous cedar trees still stood near the original driveway. By month 29, the website went live. A former coworker designed it in exchange for 2 future weekend stays and more wine than either of us needed. The first booking came 36 hours later. A couple from Baltimore wanted to hold a small September wedding. The second inquiry arrived the same week, then 5 more. Within 2 months, we were booking weekends almost a year ahead. A regional wedding magazine featured the pavilion, and a travel writer from Raleigh stayed for 2 nights and published an article calling Cedar Hollow one of Virginia's most quietly ambitious new countryside escapes. I pretended that description didn't matter to me. I printed the article anyway. By month 32, I had left my architecture firm. Cedar Hollow had become my full-time job. I employed 4 people permanently, a general manager, 2 housekeepers, and a groundskeeper. We used contractors for events, maintenance, catering, and vineyard work. That first full season, we hosted 14 weddings, 5 corporate retreats, 3 photography workshops, and a 50th anniversary dinner where 87 people danced in the barn until midnight. Our guest suite occupancy averaged 74%. The business was not making me rich, but it was profitable.
More importantly, it was stable. The loan payments were current. Payroll was covered. Bookings stretched into the following year. For the first time since receiving the property, I stopped calculating how many months I could survive if everything went wrong. Then, Patricia Monroe called. The bank wanted to include Cedar Hollow in a regional small business campaign. "Apparently," she said, "you've become one of our success stories." I laughed. 3 years earlier, I had sat across from her asking for money to repair a building with holes in the roof. Now the bank wanted photographs. The photographer came on Monday. My mother arrived Wednesday morning. She had never seen the finished property. I was in the herb garden when I heard tires on gravel. Her car stopped beside the entrance sign. She got out slowly. Then she simply stood there. From where I was, I could see her looking from the restored manor to the vineyard, then toward the pavilion glowing in the morning sun. Finally, her eyes settled on the sign. Cedar Hollow Estate. Emma Carter, founder and owner. I had installed it 8 months earlier. At the time, it seemed like branding. Watching my mother read it, I realized it was something else. A boundary.
I walked over and greeted her. For once, my mother seemed unsure what to say. "You've changed everything," she finally said. "Most of it." She looked toward the pavilion again. "How long has all this been operating?" "Almost a year." Her expression tightened slightly. "You never told us it had become this large." "You never asked." She ignored that. I gave her a tour. The guest suites were occupied, so we only looked inside one that had been cleaned after an early checkout. She ran her fingers over the stone fireplace, inspected the linen curtains, and asked where the furniture came from. In the pavilion, staff were setting tables for Friday's corporate retreat. She looked at the lighting rig, the catering entrance, and the rows of chairs stacked along the wall. "How many people can you fit in here?" 140 seated. She nodded slowly. Then we walked through the vineyard. She asked how much wine we produced. I explained that wine production was still small and that most of our revenue came from accommodation and events. "How much revenue?"
The question came so casually that I answered before thinking about it. I gave her the approximate annual figure. She stopped walking. And you own all of this yourself? Yes. No investors? No. Partners? No. I should have understood then. Her questions were not curiosity, they were inventory. We returned to the main house and sat in the kitchen with coffee. She barely touched hers. After several minutes, she said, "Your father has been thinking about the original property arrangement." I looked at her. "What about it?" "He feels circumstances have changed." "They have." "That isn't what I mean." She folded her hands on the table. "When the estate was divided, nobody expected you to turn this place into a major commercial property." I almost laughed. So? So the original division may no longer be equitable. There it was. 3 years earlier, fairness had meant Nathan receiving the finished asset while I received the collapsing one. Now that I had repaired mine, fairness apparently needed to be recalculated. You're saying Dad wants to change the inheritance? Not exactly. Then say exactly what you mean. Her expression hardened. Nathan has had difficulties recently. His investments haven't performed the way he expected, and the condominium is costing him more than anticipated. I waited. She continued, "Your father thinks Nathan could contribute significantly here." "To my business?" "To the family business." "It isn't a family business. Emma, the land came from this family. The land was transferred to me, and you've benefited enormously from that." I stared at her. The house was uninhabitable. That you were given the opportunity. That word stayed with me. Opportunity. As though the collapsing roof, debt, construction work, and 3 years of risk had been a gift somebody else was still entitled to collect on. "What exactly are you proposing?" She took a folder from her handbag. "Nathan would assume executive management of Cedar Hollow. You would remain responsible for design, guest experience, and property development." I looked at the folder, but did not touch it. "And ownership?" "Your father believes majority control should be reorganized." "Meaning Nathan gets it?" "Meaning responsibility is shared according to everyone's strengths." "And what would I get?" "A salary, obviously, a very generous one." For several seconds, I honestly had no response. They wanted to turn me into an employee of the company I had created. "No."
My mother blinked. "Emma, no, you haven't even reviewed the proposal. I don't need to." Her voice became quieter. That was always more dangerous than when she raised it. "You should think carefully before making this emotional." "I am not emotional." "You have 72 hours. I leaned back. "For what?" "To speak with your father and reach a reasonable agreement. After that, he may have to consider legal options concerning the original transfer." I studied her face. She truly believed the threat would frighten me. Instead, something inside me became remarkably calm. "You should have brought an attorney," I said. Her eyes narrowed. "Why?" "Because the next time you come here to discuss ownership, mine will be sitting beside me." She left 7 minutes later. Her coffee was still warm.
That night, I sat alone at the kitchen island with my laptop open, my phone beside it, and a glass of wine I never finished. I made 5 calls. The first was to Laura Mitchell, the attorney who had handled the deed transfer and later helped me form Cedar Hollow Hospitality, LLC. Laura specialized in property and business law. She was 46, direct, calm, and had the useful habit of making complicated situations sound boring. I told her everything my mother had said, including the 72-hour deadline and the phrase legal options. Laura was silent for several seconds. "Let me confirm something," she said. "The deed your father signed 3 years ago contained no conditions, no retained interest, no right of reversal, correct?" "Correct." "No clause tying ownership to family approval?" "No." "No requirement that the property remain residential?" "No." "You remember this because I drafted it." "I do." "Good." I heard pages turning. "Then they have no ownership claim, Emma. None. Your father transferred the property outright. Your company operates under your control. Any investment, improvements, permits, contracts, and liabilities since then are yours." I exhaled. What if they sue? They can file something. Anyone can file something. Winning is another question. There was another pause. "If they threaten you again, document it. If they interfere with employees, guests, vendors, accounts, or operations, call me immediately. They're coming back tomorrow." "Who?" "My mother and Nathan." Laura's voice changed slightly. "I'll be there." The second call was to Miguel Santos, my general manager. Miguel had joined Cedar Hollow 18 months earlier after managing 2 boutique hotels in Asheville. He knew every contract, every supplier, every booking, and probably more about our weekly cash flow than I did. I explained what was happening. He swore once, apologized, then asked what I needed. "Tomorrow morning, I want a full operational file. Current bookings, payroll, vendor agreements, licenses, insurance, event contracts, everything. Printed and digital."
I also need you in the meeting. I'll be there. Guests cannot know anything is happening. They won't. That mattered to me more than almost anything. Cedar Hollow was not going to become a family argument performed in front of paying customers. The third call was Patricia Monroe at Blue Ridge Community Bank. She answered even though it was after 7. I apologized for calling late and explained the situation. If anyone contacts the bank claiming authority over Cedar Hollow, what happens? Nothing, Patricia said immediately. Nothing? Not without your signed authorization. You are the borrower and controlling owner. Nobody changes loan terms, account access, collateral arrangements, or payment instructions because somebody says they're family. I smiled for the first time that evening. Could you put that in writing? I'll email you tonight. Then she added, do you need me there tomorrow? I hesitated. Maybe. I can be there by 10. Thank you. Emma? Yes. People get very creative when an asset becomes valuable. Documentation is your friend.
By 10:30, Miguel had already sent me a folder containing nearly everything I requested. Laura emailed a summary of the deed and company ownership structure. Patricia sent confirmation that only I could authorize account or loan changes. I printed everything. At midnight, I walked through the dark reception hall. The photograph hanging near the fireplace caught my attention. It showed Cedar Hollow on the day I first arrived. Broken windows, collapsed veranda, weeds waist-high around the entrance. I had framed it months earlier because guests love seeing the transformation. That night, it meant something different. My mother had given me 72 hours, as though she had handed me a deadline, but I had spent 3 years surviving deadlines. Permits, loan payments, inspections, construction schedules, payroll, opening dates. 72 hours did not frighten me. By then, I knew how to protect what I built.
Nathan arrived at 9:42 the next morning in a black Range Rover that looked as though it had never touched mud. My mother had arrived 20 minutes earlier and waited in her car near the gate. I watched them through the reception window. Nathan got out, adjusted his jacket, and looked toward the estate. Then he saw the sign. Cedar Hollow Estate. Emma Carter, founder and owner. He stood there longer than I expected. My mother joined him, and together they walked up the stone path. I met them in the courtyard. Staff were already working. One housekeeper crossed between the guest cottages carrying fresh linens. A catering truck was parked beside the pavilion. 2 guests sat beneath an umbrella, drinking coffee and looking over the vineyard. Nathan slowed down. This is bigger than Mom described. You never came before. He looked toward the glass pavilion. Dad said you renovated the property. I did more than renovate it. How many rooms? 8 guest suites now. His eyebrows lifted. And that building? Events? Weddings, corporate retreats, dinners, workshops. Capacity is 140. He looked back toward the vineyard. You've been running all of this? For nearly a year? My mother interrupted. We aren't here for another tour. No, I said. You're here because you think Nathan should own what I built. Nathan glanced at her. The expression on his face told me something immediately. He had not been given the entire story. That's not exactly what I was told, he said. What were you told? That Dad wanted to reorganize things, that you needed help managing expansion. I laughed once. I don't need help managing expansion. My mother's mouth tightened. Emma, this doesn't need to become hostile. It became hostile when you threatened legal action. Nathan looked at her again. You threatened her? I explained the family's options. No, I said. You gave me 72 hours to hand over control. He said nothing. For the first time, the confidence he had brought through the gate seemed less certain. He looked around again. The property was difficult to dismiss when you were standing inside it. The restored main house, the vineyard, the guest cottages, the pavilion, employees moving through a morning schedule that existed whether Nathan understood it or not. I thought this was basically a bed and breakfast, he said quietly. You thought wrong. How much is it worth? My mother shot him a look. I noticed it. So that's the question, I said. Nathan frowned. I didn't mean it like that. Then how did you mean it? He rubbed the back of his neck. I mean, this is clearly a serious operation. Yes. And profitable? Yes. My mother stepped forward, which is exactly why your father believes Nathan's experience would be useful.
Nathan has experience in commercial real estate. He has never managed a hotel, vineyard, wedding venue, restaurant operation, or hospitality staff. I manage assets, Nathan said. This isn't an asset on a spreadsheet. His face changed slightly. I could tell he disliked that sentence. But before he could answer, I opened the reception door. Come inside. My mother looked suspicious. Why? Because there are some people I'd like you both to meet. The reception hall had once been the most damaged room in the house. Now, morning light came through 3 tall windows. The original stone fireplace had been rebuilt. A long oak table stood in the center. Behind it hung framed photographs and press articles. One photograph was larger than the others. Cedar Hollow, 3 years earlier. The broken veranda, the blackened siding,
the collapsed barn visible in the background. Nathan stopped in front of it. That was this place? Yes. He stared at it. 3 people were waiting at the table. Laura Mitchell stood first. "Good morning," she said. "I'm Laura Mitchell. I represent Emma Carter and Cedar Hollow Hospitality, LLC. Nathan looked at me. LLC. Registered 31 months ago, Laura said. Emma is the sole member and controlling owner. My mother's expression changed. Laura opened a folder. The real property was transferred to Emma by recorded deed, without conditions, retained family interest, reversion provisions, or shared ownership rights. My mother started to speak. Laura raised one hand slightly. I'd like to finish. The room became very quiet. Any attempt to force, pressure, or interfere with Emma's ownership or management may create legal exposure. That includes contacting employees, banks, vendors, or clients while representing yourselves as having authority you do not possess. Nathan slowly pulled out a chair. He no longer looked like someone arriving to take control. He looked like someone discovering there had never been anything available for him to take.
Miguel Santos introduced himself next. General manager, he said. 18 months with Cedar Hollow. He placed a thick binder on the table. Current bookings, staffing records, payroll, vendor contracts, event agreements, insurance, licensing, and projected occupancy through next summer. Nathan glanced at the binder but did not open it. Miguel continued. We're currently operating at 74% average occupancy across the guest suites. We have 42 private events booked through next fall, including 19 weddings and 6 corporate retreats. My mother looked at me. You already have next year booked? Partially. Before she could respond, Patricia Monroe spoke. She had driven in from Charlottesville that morning and was seated beside Laura. Patricia Monroe, Blue Ridge Community Bank. I've handled Emma's financing since before Cedar Hollow opened. Nathan looked increasingly uncomfortable. Patricia folded her hands. The original development loan, subsequent equipment financing, and operating accounts are all under agreements controlled exclusively by Emma Carter and her company. No third party can alter those arrangements without her written approval. My mother looked down at the folder she had brought. The proposal, the one that would have placed Nathan in control and left me working for a salary. She set it on the table. Nobody touched it. You arranged all of this? She said. There was something strange in her voice, not admiration, accusation. Yes. You expected us to challenge you? No, I said. I expected someone eventually to notice the value. Nathan looked again at the old photograph hanging near the fireplace. What did the property cost you to rebuild? More than I planned. How much? Between construction, permits, landscaping, vineyard recovery, equipment, and business setup, just under $300,000. His head turned toward me. You put that much into this? Some was financed, some was savings, some came from revenue once we opened. And you guaranteed the loans? Yes. He looked back at the photograph. The version of Cedar Hollow nobody had wanted. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he asked, Did Dad help? No. Mom? No. He looked at her. She stiffened. That isn't relevant. It kind of is. Nathan. He ignored her. Did anyone in the family put money into this? No. Labor? No. Connections? Investors? No. His shoulders dropped slightly. Then he said something I never expected. I wouldn't have done it. My mother turned sharply. What? He kept looking at the photograph. If Dad had given me this place instead of the condo, I would have sold it. The room stayed silent. I probably would have listed it within a month, maybe divided the acreage if zoning allowed. There was no charm in his voice now, no performance, just honesty. He looked at me. I didn't know.
I nodded. That has been the problem. My mother pushed the folder toward me. At least read the proposal. I pushed it back. No. Emma, your father authorized this. He also signed the deed. Her face went pale with anger. We are your family. I know. Then why are you treating us like strangers? I looked at the folder. Strangers wouldn't have walked into my business and demanded control of it. Laura remained silent beside me. She didn't need to say anything. My mother stood. I think this meeting is finished. I agree. Nathan did not move immediately. He kept staring at the photograph. Then he stood and turned toward me. For what it's worth, he said quietly, this is incredible. It was the first compliment he had given me in years that didn't sound like it came with a joke attached. Thank you. My mother walked out without saying goodbye. Nathan followed several steps behind. At the door, he stopped. Emma? Yes? I really didn't understand what this was. I know. He nodded once. Then he left. Through the window, I watched them walk down the stone path. My mother moved quickly. Nathan walked slower. Halfway to the gate, he stopped and turned back toward the pavilion, the vineyard, and the house. For the first time, he wasn't looking at Cedar Hollow like something he might inherit. He was looking at it like something somebody else had earned.
After they left, the estate returned to normal almost immediately. A housekeeper crossed the courtyard carrying towels. Miguel disappeared toward the pavilion to check Friday's setup. Someone in the kitchen dropped a metal tray, followed by laughter. 2 guests were walking through the vineyard with coffee in paper cups. Nothing had stopped. That mattered. Laura gathered her papers. "You handled that well," she said. "I mostly sat there. Sometimes that's what handling something well looks like." Patricia stood near the window for a moment, looking out over the vines. "I remember when you first brought me those drawings," she said. "I remember thinking you were going to reject the loan. I almost did." I turned toward her. She smiled. Not because the plan was bad, because I wasn't sure anyone understood how much work you were volunteering for. Apparently, I didn't either. She laughed. Before leaving, Laura pointed toward the old photograph on the wall. "You should keep that forever." "I plan to." "Good. People have short memories when success makes the past inconvenient." By noon, everyone was gone. I stood alone in the reception room and looked at that photograph again. The ruined house, the collapsed veranda, the weeds, the barn with half a roof. For months, guests had asked why I displayed something so ugly in such a beautiful room. I usually told them it helped people appreciate the restoration. That day, I realized the photograph wasn't really for them. It was for me, a reminder that people who arrive after the work is finished often speak as though the finished thing had always existed. That evening, my father called. I almost let it go to voicemail. Instead, I answered. "Hi, Dad." For several seconds, there was silence. Then he said, "Your mother told me what happened. I assumed she would. She says you embarrassed her." I had my attorney explain ownership. Another pause. "I didn't know she was going to threaten legal action. But you knew about the proposal." "Yes." I walked outside onto the veranda. The last light was falling over the vineyard. "What did you think would happen?" He exhaled. "I thought Nathan could help." "With what?" "The business. Expansion. Financial structure." "Dad, you didn't even know what the business was." He didn't answer. That silence told me more than any argument could have. Finally, he said, "I knew you'd fix the property. I didn't understand the scale." "You could have visited." "I know." "You could have asked." "I know." His voice sounded different, smaller somehow. Not weak, just stripped of certainty. "I thought I was being fair when I divided everything," he said. "You gave Nathan something valuable and finished. You gave me something everyone expected me to sell. I thought the land suited you." "It did." There was another long silence. Then he said, "Your mother showed me photographs tonight." I waited. I didn't recognize the place. Most people don't. She told me about the pavilion, the vineyard, the bookings. Yes, and Nathan said he never should have been involved in that proposal. That surprised me. He said that? He said it was yours. I leaned against the railing. For years, Nathan had been the person my father trusted instinctively. Hearing that he had stepped away from this felt more significant than I wanted to admit. My father continued, "Emma, I'm sorry." I looked toward the cedar trees at the entrance. "For which part?" Another silence. "For assuming that because you didn't ask for much, you didn't need much." That was closer to the truth than anything he had ever said about us. "You always thought Nathan needed the better opportunity." I did. "And you thought I'd manage with whatever was left." "Yes." The word came quietly, no excuse attached. Then he said, "I was wrong." I stared across the vineyard. Finally, I said, "Come see it." "What?" "Cedar Hollow. Come here." "I'd like that. Come in spring, when the vines start waking up." He hesitated. "Would I be welcome?" "Yes." "Then I'll come." After we hung up, I remained outside until the courtyard lights came on automatically. 3 years earlier, I had been given the lesser thing, the neglected thing, the inconvenient thing, the thing nobody wanted. And somehow, that had given me something the finished apartment never could have. Space to build something entirely my own.
My father came the following April. He drove up alone on a Thursday morning and spent nearly the entire day at Cedar Hollow. I didn't give him the polished guest tour. Instead, I showed him the places that mattered. The section of foundation we had reinforced. The old drainage trench that had flooded twice during construction. The original beams we saved in the pavilion. The vineyard rows Samuel Price had told me might survive. We walked slowly toward the oldest vines near the southern hill. My father stopped beside one thick, twisted trunk. "Your grandmother planted some of these," he said. "I know." He touched the bark. "She used to complain your grandfather planted everything too close together." I laughed. "That sounds like her." We stood there without talking for a while. Then he looked across the property. The pavilion was visible through the trees. Guests were sitting outside one of the cottages. Miguel was speaking with a delivery driver near reception. "I gave you the worst property," Dad said. "Yes. I knew it needed work. I just didn't understand how much." "You weren't supposed to." He looked at me. "What does that mean?" "You thought Nathan needed something finished. You thought I could deal with something unfinished." His expression tightened. "That doesn't sound very good when you say it out loud." "No." We continued walking. After a few steps, I said, "But you were right about one thing." "What?" "I could deal with it." He smiled slightly. "I suppose you could." By late afternoon, we sat beneath the cedar trees near the original driveway. He looked toward the house. "Are you still angry?" "About some of it." He nodded. "I deserve that. But I'm not angry about getting Cedar Hollow." That surprised him. "Why not?" "Because the condo would have been comfortable, valuable, easy." I looked across the vineyard, but it would have been finished. He waited. This place wasn't finished. There was room to make decisions, room to fail, room to build something nobody had planned for me.
My father looked toward the pavilion. I wish I'd seen that sooner. You see it now. For me, that was enough. My mother still keeps her distance. We see each other at holidays and occasionally at family dinners. We're civil, sometimes even warm. But some relationships don't return to what they were after you finally understand their conditions. Nathan and I are different now too. He sold the Georgetown condo about 18 months after our meeting. Some investments had gone badly, and he decided to leave the firm he had worked for. Eventually, he moved to Denver and joined a smaller development company. My father says he's happier, less interested in impressing people. I hope that's true. He sent me a message last year after seeing Cedar Hollow mentioned in a travel magazine. Still can't believe you built that place. I answered, neither can I sometimes. Cedar Hollow has grown. We now employ 17 people full-time. The pavilion books weddings almost 18 months ahead during peak season.
We added 2 more guest cottages and converted an old storage building into a small farm shop. The vineyard finally produces enough fruit for limited estate bottling. We sell preserves, honey, herbs, and bottles of wine made from vines everyone assumed were dead. Last autumn, a regional travel program filmed here for 3 days. They wanted dramatic before and after photographs. I gave them the same photograph that still hangs beside the reception fireplace. The broken windows, the rotten veranda, the weeds, the damaged barn. A producer looked at it and asked me something guests have asked hundreds of times. Why keep this where everyone can see it? Doesn't it remind you of how bad things were? I looked at the photograph. No, I said. It reminds me who was here when things were bad. She waited for me to explain, so I did. When something becomes valuable, people remember the finished version. They remember the lights, the guests, the revenue, the photographs. I looked through the reception windows toward the vineyard. They forget the leaking roof. The producer smiled. And you don't? No, I never will. Because Cedar Hollow was never really a story about inheriting the lesser thing. It was about what happens when someone gives you what they believe is worthless and leaves you alone long enough to discover they were wrong. Some people arrive when the work is finished and ask what part belongs to them. Others were there when there was nothing worth claiming. I learned the difference. And now, whenever a guest asks about the photograph, I smile and tell them the truth. That isn't the before picture. I point through the window at everything outside. The before picture is the reason all of this belongs to me.